absolute pleasure.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru Shilpa.
Well, to start off, perhaps you can share a little bit about who you are in context to this overarching concept of spirituality and our connection.
Sure. My name is Priyank. I'm from London, and really I'm a very small person in the sense that spiritually I'd consider myself a novice, even though I've been doing it for many decades now. So that's who I am. Our connection, Shilpa's and my connection, is through our shared guru, Paramahansa Yogananda. You can see behind myself a picture, and also the same picture is behind Shilpa's picture, who I met spiritually, I should say, not physically. I met probably 15 years ago, and spiritually, I haven't looked back since. Changed my life, my career, my friendships, my family, you name it. That is how much of an impact it's had on my life.
And that brings us to the current days where you have a podcast on it, correct?
Correct, yes. So we have a podcast channel which is entitled Yogananda Podcast. Not very original, but I'm sure you'll agree that if you're looking for that podcast, that is what you'd probably search first. And in that podcast, I'm sure Shilpa can put a link to this in the description. In that podcast, we have done 2 series now. We're on the 2nd series. The first series we did was about Awake, the Life of Yogananda film, which was released 7 years ago. And then our current series is about the beautiful book, The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And we're discussing and sharing our experiences of that book line by line. So it's going to be a very long project.
And absolutely, I've been listening to the different episodes, and each one resonates with me. Each time I listen to it, I feel like goosebumps coming over. I'm like, I can relate to what they're saying.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, because there's such a gap in the space in terms of organizations such as Yogananda's and Self-Realization Fellowship and others, where it's very conservative, very rigid in terms of how information is disseminated, how fellowship happens, what you can and can't say. But often people miss the social, personal interactions, and that is precisely where we wanted to focus our efforts in reaching people like you, Shilpa, and our other listeners.
The timing is so impeccable, given that even though we're no longer in lockdown, we do have more social interactions. Just earlier before we hit record, I was sharing that my life had changed. I'm no longer in corporate, and I have less interaction with other humans, and especially like-minded ones.
Indeed. Yeah. Which is the beautiful thing about this whole COVID. The one beneficial thing is allowed us to use technology in much more nuanced way in terms of our social interactions, not just professionally, but through personal interactions like this, Shilpa. I'm sure we never would have met virtually had this, we had not gone through this crisis that was COVID.
Yeah, and it can be considered a boon and a blessing, and I certainly have for myself. Yeah, and that's when I went on to my entrepreneurship path during this period, which brings me to today's topic that I'd like to start off with, is part of the overarching concept of spirituality. Perhaps as a lot of people start new habits during this new part of the year, some of the things that they look for in inspiration in their personal life, as well as professional, is what can I do with my values, and making sure they're aligned with whatever I'm doing. And in some cases, a lot of people are starting new entrepreneurships and new paths. You've probably heard about the great, not a great escape, but people are leaving their jobs and starting new ventures. So I thought perhaps in January, let's start off with what is spiritual entrepreneurship, and maybe I could get your take on that concept.
Yeah, so twofold really. I think I told you, Shilpa, that I serve a lot at the London Centre of Self-Realization Fellowship, where for my sins, I'm responsible for marketing and all sorts of other fancy stuff for which I'm not at all qualified for. But entrepreneurialism, I'm certainly very adept in. If I don't mean to sound too arrogant, but ever since I was very young, I was very interested in new and innovative ways of doing things, in being really creative. Kind of just went with my nature. So I really at London Centre, I really tried to, or I didn't try actually, it was required. There was no one that was doing it, so I started doing it, and the podcast was one of those elements actually that led us to do that. But in business, as I mentioned, I'm a chartered engineer. I work for London Underground, and spirituality is quite an interesting thing, because when I first started my career, it was you'd keep it to yourself, lest someone uses it against you or makes fun of you in some way. And of course, there is still a certain element of that in corporate life. But if you're careful and if you've been burnt a few times, which I'm sure all of us have, we know where to stop. So, for example, I was on a training course, and they said, "Oh, let's have a bet," and I said, "No, I can't bet." And he said, "No," and they said, "Oh, why can't you bet? Is it religious?" And I didn't want to even go down that line. I was like, "No, I just don't bet. I'm not going to bet." So, but if I'd gone down the line of why we don't bet, then it opens up this whole can of worms, and perceptions change and all that kind of stuff, which is so I've learned very through my career where I should stop. So, for example, if I'm talking about the benefits of yoga, I wouldn't talk about the very deep benefit, or the very deep meaning, or the reason for doing it, i.e. self-realization, and that I have a guru who is Paramahansa Yogananda. I wouldn't even venture that far, but I would talk about the benefits of yoga. And certainly I've started initiatives like yoga classes, meditation classes, and for example, every once a month we have team meetings. I'd invite speakers from Yogananda's lineage, I suppose, my brother disciples who are prominent in this space, and they'd come in and do very general talk and just like hint at the deeper aspects, and mostly talk about the benefits that we all experience when we do yoga and we do meditation and we do mindfulness, and when we care deeply about others and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and interesting you should mention that, to keep some of that guarded, it helps protect ourselves. I think even Yogananda talks about not, and I may be not articulating exact his words, but not to over zealously share with the universe or the world our love for a higher connection to the universe. I'll keep it more esoteric like that for. But I love the fact that you've now taken time, though, to share what you can, to the degree you believe that you can, with fellow coworkers and others, and bringing in experts. I think even that seed of thought can make a shift.
Absolutely, and people are so hungry for it, but they rarely go deeper into that hunger. Very few people actually dig into that hunger and what's behind that hunger. What am I really hungry for? When I drink as much as I drink, what am I really after? What is it? But obviously, we as disciples, we know that we don't want this one thing. We want something that is Satchitananda, which is ever new, ever conscious, ever existing bliss consciousness. So we don't want this one experience. We want the highest and the higher and higher states of consciousness. So that's but we don't need to. I wouldn't, for example, my colleague, I was just talking to him a couple of days ago about him retiring, and he said, "Oh, but what would I do, when I retire?" And I said, "Well, if you don't know what you're going to do, then why would you retire? If you're just going to sit at home." if you're getting so much, I know he's getting a lot out of relationships at work, and he gets a lot of meaning and a lot of joy and a lot of purpose from being at work. So, and he's very capable. So why would you retire just because, you know, the system says, oh, you reach this age, this is when you should retire? That's not the case at all. If you're benefiting from being in employment and doing the thing you're doing, there's no reason why you shouldn't retire. In fact, if you can do it without the goal of, you know, just financially gaining, then potentially you could contribute and you could serve and you could provide a much deeper service to humanity and your employer in a very gross way. But obviously it's very subtle as well.
And I do believe that some of the predefined or the notions often around what it means to work and in the context often limits people's thinking that how can I experience true joy? Just thinking that, well, now the society says I must retire. But how about if there is other things you can do with your skills? And to me, the best things you could do, I would be in a cave meditating.
Yes.
But while you are serving and helping others, it comes back to what Yogananda often says, is that service is also a way to help, I would say, God or universe.
And also self-transformation as well, because it's a very simple way, isn't it? If you're meditating, you don't know if you're doing it correctly. You may experience moments of bliss and moments of joy and moments of stillness, and enjoy the after effects. But on any given meditation, am I doing this technique? Am I doing it correctly? But if you're serving, and you generally see is the fruits of your labor when you're serving are much more apparent than they are when you're doing a much more subtle and esoteric thing such as meditation and yoga. So it's a very simple expression of that service, you know, the connection with God to serve humanity. And that's what, you know, that's why our organization is called Self-Realization Fellowship. You know, we have self-realization, which is about us, but actually there's also this fellowship element, and that fellowship is not just about the world, it's also about us. It comes back to us as well.
Yes, and a little bit of a tangent, because I think you're okay with tangents. That reminds me of somewhere in one of your episodes you had talked about the heart-centered meditation and giving that love and spreading it beyond your soul to your family, your friends. And I remember somewhere I read, and I had felt that same way, but I thought it was just me, that sometimes it's too esoteric to think, well, then I feel it for even that neighbor down the street who had perhaps ticked me off one time. But that attitude, that behavior, or maybe practice, is very similar to what I think we're trying to accomplish when we're trying to be spiritual entrepreneurs. Is that we are, with good intention, serving, and the intention is to spread that vibration.
Yeah, and it certainly is infectious, isn't it? Because when you do something well and everyone is engaged, then certainly suddenly the levels of connectivity or connections that you have, or synchronicities that you have with your co-workers, is that much more elevated. And then you then become a bit more inspiring, perhaps become a better leader, in that people then naturally would look to you for an idea that can perhaps change the way they're doing things, or an innovation that can make something better. And also they're more excited to work together. And, you know, I've really enjoyed creating that dynamic with my teams. And I love that we don't need to talk about yoga and meditation. If we're just living the principles and the values, then it kind of flows out through us without us speaking it. And it's such a beautiful journey that when you take your co-workers in that space.
And I'm glad you said that, because I do believe that when I think about spiritual entrepreneurship, it feels like such a loaded word. It feels very lofty, like, well, how do I do that? You know, but what if it became a lifestyle, and an attitude or approach where these inherent principles that were taught by Yogananda, or by many universal spiritual, I would say, institutes, so to speak, they are fundamentally connected and true and the same. What if we practice that? And so even if it's a business that was intended to make, I don't know, bolt parts for some machine, but done with the right attitude, it could be a spiritual entrepreneurship.
Absolutely, and good that you used that example, because that's pretty much my area of business.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. At the moment, I'm doing something called quality assurance, which sounds mind-numbingly boring, but it's a very much needed task for all the bolts and nuts that make up complex systems such as a train.
Oh, wow. So you mentioned earlier, though, that from a young age, you had within your, I would say, behavior or psyche, this concept of being an entrepreneur. How has it sort of manifested in?
So it's a very good question, but because when I was young, it would manifest in very simple ways. What should we do with this weekend? What should we do with this holiday? How should we spend our time on this holiday? And that's a very simple, application, as it were, of that creative thinking. But as you get older and you not just get more responsible, or not just have more responsibilities, but also you gain more confidence in your ability to influence, the course of the team that you're with, or the friendship circles that you have, or the business that you're involved with. As you grow in confidence in your ability to make that positive contribution, it really, really helps, and it's like a snowball effect. And the part of that is, a lot of that is trusting yourself and your instincts, and really going with it. It's just you can't be rigid in your approach to how to get something done. And often, obviously, other people have a better idea of how to do it than you, and the worst thing you can do is be stubborn. But all of this comes with experience, and I've certainly benefited heavily from the employment opportunities that I've had, and the people that I've been involved with at the London Centre of Self-Realization Fellowship. They've really inspired me to build my confidence in areas that I've got really no qualification to be in. For example, podcasting, or speaking about Guruji, at the moment I'm doing marketing at the London Centre. And as you say, as I I told you, I'm an engineer, so I have a purely technical background. So this is, it's just this Guruji, or God, is just, if you allow him, he shapes you to be, be this like divine chameleon, to take the shape and the color that's needed for whichever, wherever God is placing you. Or wherever the divine is placing you at this present moment in time, which could be in all sorts of weird and wonderful places.
Speaking of which, when you said that, you mentioned a couple of things. One is you mentioned QA, and you're like, oh, it could be boring, but to me, it's not boring at all. My background is in user experience. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes, I do. No, yes.
So it's just all a matter of perspective, because someone like myself who loves details, you're like, I can really delve into it. But also a thought came into my mind. I thought maybe we could bring that idea into this entrepreneurship conversation. As Yogananda talked about your role in life. And often I wrestle and argue with Guruji about this in a nice way. But like, sometimes I feel that we're given multiple roles, or multiple hats. And some hats we don't quite know what kind of attitude to keep with it, or behavior or approach. And how does that play into spiritual entrepreneurship, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this comes back to what I was saying, is that you have to you have to trust that you can provide something valuable to any scenario that life throws at you. And through your experience, if you focus on the positives, you should hopefully see that you've influenced so many things in your life in such a positive way, and such you've developed things that needed developing. And I actually keep a journal of positive changes that I've had, or positive influences that I've had. And that all comes back to just being able to really rely on yourself in terms of and be confident in yourself, because God will throw you in so many different walks, and it's not just to test you, is it? It's also to grow you, and that's something that you have to keep at the forefront of your mind. And I'll give you an example. Working with someone that you don't like to work with, one approach to that is usually just don't work with that person. Just seek to avoid that person. But in that, you are not taking the most of your opportunity, are you? The opportunity there, the unique opportunity for you to grow and to be able to work with any individual, is such a rare thing that you can do, and something, that quality that you can develop, because you can't control who your neighbor is, can you? You can't control who the guy in front of you or behind you in the traffic jam is, but you can control how you react and what your experience of those interactions with is. And that's what you have to remember. And I think you have to really not just rely on the teachings, but actually really reflect on you applying those teachings, even if it's just 1%. Yogananda, he said, Yogananda has written many books. He's written commentaries on, the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible. So you could spend your whole life, reading his works. But he said, if even if you take 1% of what I've said, that will take you to your goal. And if we just absorb or reflect on some of those teachings, and if you should hope, I certainly have seen that it's had a positive change in my life, this teaching or that teaching, and then take that confidence that teaching you can then apply to, you've actually learned and you've actually grown, so you have the capability to influence and to change, and to be in charge of a situation where you can really actually resolve that problem of being able to work with someone that you don't get along with, or that neighbor that you don't speak to, etc.
And that's true not only if you were working in a team within a corporation, but even as an entrepreneur, you still need to engage with different people who may facilitate your business. Mm-hmm. And like you were saying, even taking 1% of a teaching. For myself, I remember not so long ago, there was this epiphany where I'm like, well, I must think of myself as this grounded tree. And just because someone else's behavior has shifted or triggered me, it shouldn't trigger me, because I need to be solid in my own skin. So when you are working on specific projects that are, let's say, an entrepreneurial nature, where you have to come up with new ideas, how do you see yourself being able to, I would say, get inspired or bring in the right solutions at the right time?
Really, really glad you asked that question, actually. Sure, because there's two types of way of being innovative, or requirements. There's one way where it's instant. You have to think instantly, and that's probably the most challenging one, where you don't have long to, you have to act dynamically. But most often, I've found in my life, you actually have time. You have the benefit and the privilege of time, and I often sit with things. So I would let have the problem. Don't try and solve the problem. Just have the problem in your consciousness. floating in your consciousness, and then you'll find that intuitively threads of like inspiration about how to solve that problem. And that may take 2 or even 3 days, but it's that you'll find that the solution that you've come up with is just so much more it's just so much more suited and so much better that you had that reflective time rather than just going with your first instinct and just submitting that proposal or whatever straight away. Like, for example, I was for my sin I was creating a video, and I've never created a video in my life. Our podcasts, we don't edit them, we just publish them. So I had to create a video. Actually, it was we had a Christmas concert. That's another story. We had a Christmas concert, so I was creating a promotional video, and I've never done video editing, so I don't know about scene transitions, audio, and graphics and things like that. So, but I've seen things like you've seen it done well, right? So in your consciousness, you've seen how it could be, and obviously you have the benefit of putting your own spin on it. And so this is something that I'd never done before, and I just I've started putting pen to paper, and I thought, oh no, this is not like an engineering problem that I can solve. This is how I this is the starting equation, this is the solution, this is how you get to it. This is not one of those times. This is something that requires real reflection and real stepping back from the canvas, as it were. So I did that, and over 3 days, the start of it, the middle of it, and the end of it all came into my awareness. And then in the third day, I was just within 2 hours, it was created. It was just quite a magical experience, actually. That was only a few days ago.
I often find myself contributing some sparks of inspiration to what others would call universe. For me, it's often Yogananda, or just being receptive and open to solutions which magically just seem to appear. So that is wonderful. And one of the things, maybe you tied a few times to the word confidence and the concept of confidence. Perhaps even as an entrepreneur, the creativity requires confidence, knowing that the solutions will come together. Absolutely.
Yeah, you do. Self-confidence is one thing, isn't it? But the actual confidence in that the solution that you've come up with is going to be the right one is a separate thing as well.
Yes. In this knowing and trusting that what you're doing, the path that you're on is correct, is a big one. What are some of the challenges you have found as people who are like, I want to start my own business, I want to be an entrepreneur, but they haven't quite tapped into the idea, is it a spiritual business, just a entrepreneurial business? But if they're missing the spiritual element, what do you think that means?
Well, I think most endeavors can be spiritualized, can't they? And if they're missing the spiritual element, then really it's more of a selfish endeavor, isn't it? So I often try to, with my family, who aren't necessarily spiritual. 99% of my family aren't spiritual at all, but you don't need to talk about God very plainly. You can just talk about concepts that are very universal, like being positive, being loving. So these like little strands of like kind of like prerequisites of something that's spiritual. You can just talk about them to use that as this should be like the primary motive in the endeavor that you're undertaking. And I found that really helps because not everyone is really ready or willing to just accept universal love, unconditional love. These are very high and very altruistic goals that may not come perhaps in this lifetime, but that doesn't mean that we can't aspire to them. And obviously I do, but there's all these other smaller goals that you can achieve along the way.
Starting with service, often even if that it seems a little bit challenging, trying to weave in how is this serving others, truly serving.
Absolutely.
What Yogananda created, a self-realization fellowship, feels like the ultimate spiritual entrepreneurship. And not that it was a business, it's a nonprofit, but it was the ultimate, I would say, mechanism to spread these teachings in a way that can generally serve so many people, even if they're not spiritual.
Absolutely. And his most favorite prayer, so Yogananda would often start meditations and end meditations with a prayer. And his favorite prayer was, Heavenly Father, may thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of my or our devotion. And may I, or if you're in a meditation group, may we be able to awaken thy love in all hearts. So I think it's such a beautiful prayer that he uses. And whenever I'm leading a meditation, I tend to often, that's my go-to one to end the meditation with. But it's that community, the community element, and that in the fellowship element screams out, doesn't it? And it's so universal in its sound and its meaning. May thy love shine forever, may we be able to awaken thy love in all hearts.
Absolutely. I start my prayers with that as well. And one of the key things that I believe we all do as human beings, whether it's intentionally or consciously, unconsciously, is we have an intention. So as an entrepreneur, I believe if you start with the, I would say, pure intention, and I believe that can change the trajectory because you've put that vibration out. One of the things I start off every morning, you probably heard, is I will reason, I will will, and I will act. But guide down my reason, will, and activity to do the right thing. And sometimes I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. There's no sign that shows up each morning that says you're on the right path.
If only there was a. Well, maybe there is. We just not yet awakened enough to read that sign.
No, not quite awake yet.